In the harsh Wyoming Territory of 1883, a broken woman arrives seeking refuge, only to discover that some wounds run deeper than prairie roots. Anya Petrov crossed an ocean to escape her past, trading the familiar cruelty of the old country for the promise of a new life as a mail-order bride. But America offered no sanctuary, only a different kind of torment under the calloused hands of a man who saw her as property. When death finally freed her from that prison, she found herself alone on unforgiving land, with nothing but the clothes on her back and scars that told stories she'd rather forget. Then fate led her to Jack Callahan's doorstep. The wealthy cattle baron needed help caring for his ailing mother, and Anya needed work that didn't require explanations. But as autumn gives way to winter's bite, something unexpected blooms between them. A tenderness neither dared hope for again. What happens when the ghosts of her past refuse to stay buried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Callahan ranch, painting the weathered fence posts in shades of gold and amber. Jack Callahan stood on his front porch, coffee mug warming his hands, watching the cattle move like dark clouds across the distant pasture. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd built something lasting from nothing but determination and Wyoming dirt. The ranch house behind him told the story of 3 generations. His grandfather's original cabin still formed the heart of the structure, though Jack's father had added the wide front porch and second story. Now it was Jack's turn to leave his mark, though lately that felt more like maintenance than progress. The paint on the shutters needed touching up, and the barn roof had developed a troublesome leak that seemed to migrate no matter how many times he patched it. "Jackie, you're burning daylight, standing there like a scarecrow." The voice belonged to his mother, Margaret Callahan, though everyone called her Maggie. She appeared in the doorway behind him, leaning heavily on the walking stick she'd taken to using since her hip started giving her trouble. At 71, she remained formidable despite the silver threading through her auburn hair and the lines that mapped a lifetime of high-altitude sun and hard-won laughter. "Just checking the weather, Ma," Jack replied, though they both knew he was doing more than that. He was calculating how many head of cattle to move to the south pasture before the first snow, whether the hay stores would last through what the almanac promised would be a harsh winter, how long he could manage the ranch alone, with his mother's health declining. "Weather looks fine to me. What doesn't look fine is you trying to do the work of 3 men. Maggie stepped beside him, her keen blue eyes scanning the same vista that occupied his thoughts. Mrs. Henderson mentioned her niece might be looking for work. Nice girl, apparently, good with household things. Jack had heard this suggestion before in various forms. The truth was, he needed help, not just with his mother, but with the endless domestic details that kept a ranch running smoothly. Cooking, cleaning, mending, the 1,000 small tasks that had once been shared, burdens when his father was alive, and his mother spry enough to handle them without assistance. "I don't need some young girl underfoot, Ma. We managed just fine." Maggie's laugh held more knowing than humor. "Fine, is it? When's the last time you had a proper meal that didn't come from a can? When's the last time those curtains saw soap and water? And don't get me started on the state of your shirts." She gestured toward the laundry line where 3 of his work shirts hung stiff as boards, obviously washed by inexperienced hands. Jack took a long sip of coffee, considering. The truth was, he'd been managing poorly for months. Ever since his mother's health had begun its slow decline, he'd found himself pulled in too many directions. The ranch demanded constant attention, fences to mend, cattle to tend, hay to harvest and store, but the house needed care too, and his mother needed care most of all. Besides, Maggie continued, settling into the wooden rocker he'd built for her last spring, it's not some young slip of a thing I'm talking about. There's a woman in town, came in on the stage 3 days ago. Pastor Williams mentioned she's looking for honest work. Says she's got experience keeping house. This was news to Jack. Strangers were rare in their small corner of Wyoming Territory, especially women traveling alone. What's her story? Widow, from what I hear, lost her husband recently. Maggie's voice softened with the empathy that came from her own experience of loss. Jack's father had died 5 years ago, struck down by a heart attack while checking on the cattle during a late spring blizzard. Pastor says she's been staying at the boarding house, but she can't afford it much longer. Jack set down his coffee mug and leaned against the porch railing, studying the horizon where the Wind River Mountains cut sharp profiles against the morning sky. His father had always said that a man's character showed most clearly in how he treated those who had nothing. To offer him in return, a widow in need of work, fell squarely into that category. What's her name? Anya something, foreign-sounding, Polish maybe, or Russian. Maggie began her gentle rocking, a sure sign she sensed victory approaching. Pastor says she's quiet, keeps to herself, but she's clean and well-mannered. The practical side of Jack's mind was already working through the possibilities. They had 2 spare bedrooms upstairs. His sister Sarah's old room had been empty since she married and moved to Colorado, and the small room next to it had served as storage for years. A live-in housekeeper would solve multiple problems at once. His mother would have companionship and help with daily tasks. The household would run more smoothly, and he could focus his energy on the ranch without feeling guilty about neglecting the domestic side of their lives. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to meet her," he said finally. Maggie's smile was triumphant but restrained. She'd learned over the years not to push too hard when Jack was coming around to her way of thinking. "I thought you might see the sense in it. Pastor Williams said she'd be at the church this morning, helping with the cleaning. If you were to ride into town for supplies—" Jack glanced at the sun, now fully risen and burning off the morning chill. He did need supplies: flour, sugar, salt, and a dozen other necessities. And if he happened to encounter this mysterious widow while he was conducting his legitimate business, well, that was simply efficient time management. "I'll hitch up the wagon," he said, already moving toward the barn. An hour later, Jack guided his team down the dusty main street of Clearwater, the nearest thing to a town within 50 miles of the ranch. It wasn't much to look at. A general store, a saloon, the church, a few other businesses, and maybe 30 houses scattered along streets that turned to mud every time it rained. But it was their town, and it served their needs. He tied off the horses in front of Mitchell's general store and was loading sacks of flour into the wagon bed when Pastor Williams approached. The minister was a tall, thin man with prematurely grey hair and the kind of steady presence that made people want to confess their troubles without being asked. "Morning, Jack. Good to see you in town, Pastor." Jack touched the brim of his hat. "Ma mentioned you might know of someone looking for domestic work." "Ah, yes, Mrs. Petrov." The pastor's expression grew thoughtful. "She's been helping Mrs. Patterson with the church cleaning this week. Hard-working woman, very thorough. Barely speaks above a whisper, though." Something in the pastor's tone caught Jack's attention. Something wrong with her. Not wrong exactly, but she's been through something hard, that much is clear. Jumps at sudden noises, keeps her head down, won't look a man directly in the eye. Pastor Williams paused, choosing his words carefully. "I get the sense she's running from something, though she's never said as much." Jack nodded slowly. He'd seen that look before, in animals that had been mistreated. It took time and patience to earn their trust again. "She inside, last I saw. Fair warning, Jack, she's likely to bolt if you come on too strong. Whatever she's been through, it's left its mark." The church was cool and dim after the bright morning sun. Jack removed his hat as his eyes adjusted, taking in the familiar scene of wooden pews and simple furnishings. He could hear the soft sound of movement from near the altar, where someone was working quietly. She was smaller than he'd expected, this mysterious widow. Dark hair pulled back severely, wearing a plain grey dress that had seen better days, but was clean and carefully mended. She moved with economic efficiency, dusting each surface with deliberate care. When his boots scraped against the floor, she froze like a deer sensing a predator. "Mom," Jack kept his voice low and respectful. "I'm Jack Callahan. Pastor Williams said you might be looking for work." She turned slowly, and Jack found himself looking into the darkest eyes he'd ever seen. They were beautiful eyes, but haunted, holding depths of experience that no woman her age should have to carry. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of pale skin that spoke of northern winters, and the fine bone structure that suggested good breeding, fallen on hard times. "I am Anya Petrov," she said, her accent thick but her English carefully pronounced. "You are looking for servant, yes?" "Housekeeper," Jack corrected gently. "Someone to help care for my mother and manage the household. It's a big ranch lot of work, but you'd have your own room, meals, fair wages." He watched her process this information, saw the way she calculated odds and possibilities behind those dark eyes. She was clearly desperate but trying not to show it, a combination that tugged at something protective in Jack's chest. "Your mother, she is kind woman." The question surprised him with its hesitancy. "Very kind. She's the one who suggested. I find someone to help. She's getting on in years, needs assistance with daily tasks." Anya nodded slowly. "I can cook, clean, tend sick. I work hard." She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "I do not steal, I do not cause trouble. I want only honest work. That's all I'm offering." Jack studied her carefully, noting the way she held herself, ready to run, but desperately hoping she wouldn't have to. "Why don't you come out to the ranch, meet my mother, see if it suits you?" For a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she set down her dusting cloth and smoothed her skirt with hands that trembled just slightly. "When would you like me to?" "Come. How about now? I've got the wagon, can give you a ride." The fear that flashed across her face was unmistakable. Jack realized his mistake immediately. A strange man, a wagon, a lonely ride to an isolated ranch, to a woman who'd clearly been hurt before. It must sound like a trap. "Or," he said quickly, "you could follow in a hired buggy, whatever makes you comfortable." The relief in her expression confirmed his suspicion. "That would be better, thank you." They arranged for her to arrive at the ranch the following morning, giving her time to gather her few possessions and settle her account. At the boarding house, as Jack drove home, he found himself thinking about those haunted dark eyes and the careful way she'd held herself, as if expecting a blow at any moment. Whatever had happened to Anya Petrov, it had taught her to expect the worst from the world. Jack made a mental note to move slowly, to prove through actions rather than words that not all men were threats to be feared. He was still thinking about her when he pulled into the ranch yard, where Maggie waited on the porch with barely contained curiosity written across her weathered features. The hired buggy arrived just after dawn, its wheels crunching on the frost-covered ground as it made its way up the long drive to the Callahan ranch house. Jack watched from the kitchen window as Anya Petrov climbed down carefully, clutching a small carpet bag that appeared to contain everything she owned in the world. The driver handed down a larger bundle wrapped in oiled cloth, bedding perhaps, or winter clothing. She stood for a moment beside the buggy, surveying the ranch with those careful dark eyes. Jack could see her taking inventory. The solid construction of the house, the well-maintained barn, the orderly appearance of the property. She was calculating safety, he realized, determining whether this place offered refuge or represented another kind of danger. Maggie had insisted on being present for the introduction, though her hip forced her to remain seated in her favorite chair by the fireplace. She dressed in her best dress and had Jack brush her hair until it shone, as if she were receiving royalty rather than a desperate widow seeking work. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," Maggie commanded as the buggy driver departed. "Go help the poor woman with her things." Jack stepped onto the porch, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. "Mrs. Petrov, welcome to the Callahan ranch." I gazed, looked up at him, and he was struck again by the shadows in her eyes. In the morning light, he could see details he'd missed in the dim church. a fading bruise along her jawline, carefully concealed with powder, and the way she favored her left arm as if it had been injured recently. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. You are very kind to offer me this opportunity." He reached for her carpet bag, but she pulled it back instinctively before catching herself and reluctantly allowing him to take it. The reaction told him everything he needed to know about her recent experiences with men. "My mother's eager to meet you," he said, leading her toward the house. "Fair warning, she's got strong opinions about most things, but her bark's worse than her bite." As they entered the front room, Maggie looked up from her chair with bright curiosity. "So you're the mysterious Mrs. Petrov. Come here, child, let me get a proper look at you." Anya approached cautiously, stopping just outside arm's reach. "Mrs. Callahan, your son has told me you need assistance with household matters, among other things." Maggie's sharp eyes were taking in details, the careful mending on Anya's dress, the way she held herself, the unmistakable signs of someone who'd learned to make herself small and invisible. "How long since you lost your husband?" The question hit like a physical blow. Anya's face went pale, and her hands clenched at her sides. 2 months, she whispered. "Recent, then. I'm sorry for your loss." Maggie's voice carried genuine sympathy, though Jack caught the slight questioning tone. 2 months was barely time to grieve, let alone travel across the country seeking work. "He was not a good man," Anya said quietly, the words seeming to surprise even her. "I should not speak ill of the dead, but sometimes the dead deserve." "Ill speaking," Maggie said firmly. "No need to pretend grief you don't feel, child. We've all known men who left the world a better place by leaving it." The unexpected understanding in Maggie's words seemed to unlock something in Anya. Her rigid posture softened slightly, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked directly at Jack's mother. "You are very wise, Mrs. Callahan. Wise enough to know a woman in trouble when I see one." Maggie gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, have some coffee. Jack, stop looming in the doorway like a thundercloud." As Jack moved to pour coffee, he listened to his mother's gentle questioning. Anya revealed little about her past, but what she did share painted a picture of hardship that made Jack's chest tighten with protective anger. She'd been born in a small village in Poland, married young to a man who'd brought her to America, with promises of prosperity. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in a cycle of poverty and abuse that had ended only with her husband's sudden death. "Heart attack," she said, though something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. "The doctor said his drinking had weakened him. One morning I woke and he was gone." "And you came west because?" Maggie prompted. "There was nothing left for me there. No family, no money. Victor had debts." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "I thought perhaps in new territory I could make new life." Jack set down the coffee cup in front of her, noting how she flinched slightly when his hand came near hers. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Whatever you're running from, it can't reach you on this ranch." The look she gave him was equal, parts grateful and skeptical. "You are kind to say so, Mr. Callahan, but some things, they follow you no matter how far you run." There was something prophetic in those words, though Jack wouldn't understand their significance until much later. For now, he focused on the practical matters, showing Anya to her room, explaining the household routines, introducing her to the daily rhythms of ranch life. Her room was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked out over the kitchen garden. Anya stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if she couldn't quite believe the space was truly hers. "The door has a lock," Jack said, understanding her hesitation. "Keys in the drawer there. You can lock it from the inside, keep it locked at night if that makes you feel safer." The relief that crossed her face confirmed his suspicion that safety had been a rare commodity in her life. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the following days, Anya settled into the household with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to making herself useful. She rose before dawn to start the fires and prepare breakfast, worked steadily through the day at tasks both large and small, and retired early to her room, where she could be heard moving around well into the night, as if sleep remained elusive. She was an excellent cook, Jack discovered, with a talent for turning simple ingredients into meals that actually tasted like something more than fuel. She kept the house spotless, without making anyone feel like they couldn't live in it, and she tended to Maggie with a gentle competence that spoke of experience, caring for those in need. But it was the small things that told the real story of Anya Petrov, the way she automatically positioned herself near exits when in a room with men, how she flinched at sudden movements or raised voices even when they weren't directed at her. The careful way she portioned food, as if she'd grown up never quite sure when the next meal would come. Most telling of all was the item she kept wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her carpet bag, a torn piece of fabric that Jack glimpsed one day when helping her move furniture. It looked like it might once have been part of a dress, white or cream-colored, with delicate lace trim. A wedding dress, perhaps, though why she'd keep such a thing in its damaged state was a mystery. 3 weeks into her employment, the mystery began to unravel. Jack was working in the barn when he heard Anya scream, a sound of pure terror that sent ice through his veins. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house, expecting to find intruders or some disaster. Instead, he found Anya backed against the kitchen wall, staring in horror at a man standing in the doorway. The stranger was tall and lean, with the kind of sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty that lived behind his pale eyes. His clothes marked him as a traveling man, dusty, worn, but of decent quality. "There you are, my dear wife," the man said in accented English similar to Anya's. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" Jack moved instinctively between them, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "I think there's been some mistake, friend. This lady's widowed." The man's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Widowed? Is that what she told you?" He looked past Jack to where Anya cowered against the wall. "Tell them, Anya. Tell them how you tried to poison your devoted husband. Tell them how you ran like a thief in the night when your murder attempt failed." "You're supposed to be dead," Anya whispered, her face white as parchment. "They said, the doctor said many things, but I am very much alive, as you can see." Victor, for this had to be the husband she'd thought dead, smiled with predatory satisfaction. "And I've come to take you home." Jack's hand closed on his gun grip. "The lady's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Victor's pale eyes fixed on him with amused contempt. "The lady is my wife, legally bound to me before God and man. She belongs to me, just as much as that horse in your barn or the cattle in your fields. More, perhaps, since I paid good money for her passage from the old country." The casual way he spoke of owning Anya sent rage flooding through Jack's system, but before he could respond, Maggie's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "No woman belongs to any man in this house," she said from the kitchen doorway, her walking stick gripped like a weapon. "And no man who speaks of women as property is welcome under my roof." Victor's attention shifted to Maggie, and his smile grew uglier. "Ah, the mother-in-law, how charming. I'm afraid this is family business, old woman. It doesn't concern you." That was his second mistake. His first had been coming to the Callahan ranch, thinking he could simply take what he wanted. But calling Maggie Callahan an old woman and dismissing her as irrelevant was the kind of error that could prove fatal in Wyoming Territory. Jack's gun was in his hand so fast, Victor barely had time to register the movement. "You've got 3 seconds to get off my property before I put a bullet through you." Victor raised his hands in mock surrender, but his smile never wavered. "Such violence over a runaway wife. Tell me, has she warmed your bed yet? Has she shown you the tricks I taught her?" The words were calculated to provoke, and they succeeded. Jack took a step forward, his finger tightening on the trigger. Only Anya's soft voice stopped him from ending Victor's life right there. "Please," she whispered, "do not kill him for my sake. I'm not worth such trouble. The defeat in her voice was worse than Victor's taunts. Jack looked at her, this woman who'd brought light and order to their household, who'd shown such gentle care for his mother, who deserved so much better than the fear that lived in her eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. "You're wrong," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off Victor. "You're worth any amount of trouble." To Victor he added, "You've got till sundown to clear out of this territory. If I see you again, I'll kill you." Victor's smile faltered slightly, perhaps recognizing the deadly seriousness in Jack's tone. "This isn't over, cowboy. A man's wife is his property by law. I'll be back with proper authorities." "You do that," Jack replied, "and I'll be ready after." Victor left. Anya collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I brought this trouble to your house. I should leave. You should stay right where you are," Maggie said firmly, moving to put a protective arm around the younger woman's shoulders. "This is your home now, child, and we protect our own." But as Jack watched Anya struggle to compose herself, he knew this was only the beginning. Victor hadn't come all this way just to give up at the first sign of resistance. He'd be back, and next time he'd be better prepared. The peaceful life they'd been building was over. Now came the reckoning. The 3 days following Victor's visit passed in a tense quiet that reminded Jack of the stillness before a prairie storm. Anya went about her duties with mechanical precision, but the light that had slowly begun to return to her eyes during her first weeks at the ranch had dimmed to something flat and lifeless. She jumped at every sound, positioned herself near exits again, and barely spoke, except when directly addressed. Most troubling of all, she'd stopped eating properly. Jack noticed how she pushed food around her plate at meals, taking only small bites when she thought no one was watching. It was as if Victor's reappearance had convinced her she didn't deserve sustenance, didn't deserve the basic comforts of life. Maggie, however, had other ideas. On the 4th morning, Jack found his mother in the kitchen before dawn, carefully arranging delicate china cups and saucers on a silver tray he'd never seen before. The set was clearly old and precious, thin porcelain, decorated with tiny painted roses, the kind of thing that spoke of better times and distant memories. "Going to have tea with our girl," Maggie announced when she noticed his questioning look. Sometimes a woman needs to talk to another woman, especially when men have made such a mess of things. Jack poured himself coffee and settled at the kitchen table to wait for Anya's usual early arrival. When she appeared in the doorway, punctual as always, her eyes went immediately to the elegant tea service. "Mrs. Callahan, I can prepare your breakfast." "Nonsense! Breakfast can wait. Come sit with me, child. I want to show you something special." Anya approached hesitantly, her gaze fixed on the beautiful china. "This is very fine. Too fine for everyday use." "Exactly why we should use it," Maggie said, settling carefully into her chair. "My grandmother brought this set from Ireland when she was barely older than you are now. Packed it in straw and carried it across an ocean, then across half a continent, because she refused to leave behind the last beautiful thing from her old life." As Maggie poured tea into the delicate cups, her movements took on a ceremonial quality. "She used to tell me that beautiful things were meant to be shared, not hidden away for special occasions that might never come. What good is beauty, she'd say, if it sits in darkness?" Anya accepted the offered cup with hands that trembled slightly. "In my country we had saying, pretty things are for pretty people. I was not the pretty one in my family." "Pretty is as pretty does," Maggie said firmly, "and you, my dear, have the prettiest soul I've encountered in many a year. The way you tend my garden, the care you take with meals, how gentle you are when my old bones ache. That's real beauty." For the first time since Victor's visit, Anya's expression softened. "Your grandmother, she sounds like wise woman, wise enough to know that starting over takes courage. She left everything familiar because she believed in the possibility of something better." Maggie leaned forward slightly. "Just like you did. But I brought danger to your house. You should not have suffered as you did, Maggie interrupted. And you should not blame yourself for one man's cruelty. Victor's choices are his own. Your choices are yours. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping tea from cups that had crossed oceans and decades to reach this kitchen on a Wyoming ranch. Jack watched from his position at the larger table, understanding that something important was happening, but knowing better than to intrude. "Mrs. Callahan," Anya said finally, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course you can." "When Mr. Callahan's father died, were you afraid? Of being alone? Of not knowing how to continue?" Maggie's smile held both sadness and strength. "Terrified. Thomas and I had been married 37 years. I'd never made a decision without consulting him, never managed money or dealt with ranch business. Suddenly, I was supposed to know things I'd never needed to learn. But you managed. I learned, made mistakes, certainly, but I had Jack to help and good neighbors, and I discovered I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for." She reached across the small table to touch Anya's hand gently. "Just like you're discovering. I feel so weak, so foolish for believing Victor was dead, for thinking I could escape what I had been." "What you had been," Maggie repeated thoughtfully. "Or what he told you that you were." The question seemed to surprise Anya. She set down her teacup carefully, as if afraid her shaking hands might break something precious. I'm not sure I understand the difference." "The difference, child, is everything. A man like Victor, and I've known a few in my time, they're skilled at making women believe terrible things about themselves. They tear you down so thoroughly that you forget you were ever whole." Anya's eyes filled with tears. "He said I was worthless, stupid. Said no real man would ever want me because I was damaged goods, a charity case he'd taken pity on." "And what do you say?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack found himself holding his breath, waiting for Anya's response. I don't know what I say. For so long his voice was the only one I heard." "Then maybe it's time to listen to other voices," Maggie suggested gently. "What does Jack's voice tell you? What does mine? What does your own heart whisper when you allow it to speak?" Before Anya could answer, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the intimate moment. Jack was on his feet instantly, moving to the window to peer out at the yard. 3 riders were approaching, not Victor but strangers nonetheless, and in Wyoming Territory, unexpected visitors often meant trouble. "Stay inside," he told the women, checking his gun before stepping onto the porch. The lead rider was a man in his 50s, wearing a badge that caught the morning light. A sheriff then, or perhaps a marshal. The 2 men flanking him had the hard look of professional gun hands. "Morning," the lawman called as they reined in near the porch. "I'm Sheriff Coleman from Laramie, looking for a woman named Anya Petrov. Heard she might be working here." Jack's hand rested casually near his gun. "Might be. What's your business?" "With her?" "Official business. Her husband filed a complaint, says she stole money and property when she ran off. Says she's been spreading lies about him to cover her own crimes. Her husband's supposed to be dead." Sheriff Coleman's smile was humorless. "Reports of his death were apparently greatly exaggerated. He's very much alive and very much wanting. His wife back. Law's on his side, I'm afraid. A man's got rights where his wife's concerned." Jack felt anger building in his chest, but kept his voice level. "What kind of rights?" "The legal kind. Marriage is a contract, and she broke it when she ran. Theft charges aside, she belongs with her husband. And if she doesn't want to go, what she wants isn't really the issue. Law's the law." From inside the house came the sound of breaking china, delicate porcelain shattering against the floor. Jack knew without looking that Anya had heard every word of the conversation. He could picture her in the kitchen, trembling hands unable to hold the precious teacup steady as her world collapsed around her again. "I'll need to speak with her," Sheriff Coleman continued. "Hear her side of things, though I suspect it'll be mostly hysterics and wild accusations. Women get emotional when they're caught in wrongdoing." "She's not going anywhere," Jack said quietly. "I'm afraid that's not your decision to make, Mr. Callahan. This is a matter of law. not sentiment. Then I guess we'll let a judge decide. You want to take her, you'll need a warrant. Sheriff Coleman's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult, Callahan. Victor Petrov's got rights and he's got friends. Important friends who don't take kindly to interference in legal matters. The threat was clear enough. Jack nodded slowly, understanding the game now. Victor hadn't come alone to Wyoming Territory. He'd brought influence, money, perhaps connections that reached into places where justice was supposed to be blind, but too often wasn't. Like I said, Sheriff, you want her? Get a warrant. Coleman spat into the dust. You're making a mistake, Rancher. This woman's poison. She'll bring nothing but trouble to your door. She's brought nothing but kindness to this house, Jack replied, which is more than I can say for the men chasing her. After the sheriff and his men rode away, Jack found Anya kneeling in the kitchen, carefully gathering pieces of broken china with tears streaming down her face. Maggie sat nearby, her own eyes bright with anger and sorrow. I'm sorry, Anya whispered, holding up a fragment of delicate porcelain. Your grandmother's teacup. I couldn't hold on. It's just a cup, Maggie said firmly, though Jack could. See, the loss pained her. What matters is that you're still here with us. But for how long? Anya's voice cracked. You heard the sheriff. Victor has law on his side. He has money, influence. What do I have? Jack knelt beside her, carefully taking the broken pieces from her hands. You have us, he said simply, and sometimes that's enough. But even as he spoke the words, Jack wondered if they were true. Could a small ranch in Wyoming Territory really stand against the kind of power Victor seemed to command? Could good intentions and righteous anger overcome legal documents and political connections? Looking at Anya's tear-stained face, at the fear that had returned to her eyes, Jack made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would not let Victor Petrov take her back into darkness. Some things were worth fighting for, and a woman's right to choose her own fate was surely one of them. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Jack had the uncomfortable feeling that the weather wasn't the only tempest heading their way. In the days following Sheriff Coleman's visit, Jack found himself studying Anya with new eyes. Not the furtive glances he'd stolen before, born of a man's natural appreciation for a woman's quiet beauty, but the careful observation of someone, trying to understand another person's true nature beneath layers of fear and self-doubt. What he discovered surprised him. Despite her timid demeanor and tendency to shrink from confrontation, Anya possessed a quiet strength that revealed itself in small, determined acts. When a late autumn storm brought down a section of fence near the house, she appeared at his side with tools and leather gloves, working wordlessly to help repair the damage. When one of the milk cows developed a limp, she spent hours researching remedies in his father's old veterinary guides, then administered treatment with steady, capable hands. Most telling of all was the way she interacted with the land itself. Jack often found her in the kitchen garden at dawn, tending plants with the kind of instinctive understanding that couldn't be taught. She seemed to know exactly when the last tomatoes needed harvesting, which herbs could survive the first frost, how to coax late blooms from the struggling rosebush his mother had planted years ago. She has farmer's hands, Maggie observed one evening as they watched Anya through the kitchen window. She was kneeling among the late vegetables, carefully, selecting seeds to save for next year's planting. Been working soil since she was small, I'd wager. Jack nodded, noting the way Anya moved among the plants with unconscious grace. Makes me wonder what other talents Victor tried to beat out of her. It was a harsh thing to say, but Jack had seen enough of the world to recognize the signs. The way Anya sometimes touched her ribs when she thought no one was looking. The careful way she moved in the mornings, as if old injuries still pained her. The absolute terror that had filled her eyes when Victor appeared in their kitchen. That evening, as autumn's chill settled over the ranch, Jack found Anya sitting on the back porch steps, wrapped in one of Maggie's shawls. She was holding something, small in her hands, turning it over and over with her fingers. Mind if I sit? He asked, settling beside her when she nodded. In the lamplight spilling from the kitchen window, he could see what she held, a small wooden cross, carved with intricate details that spoke of patient craftsmanship. The wood was dark with age and handling, worn smooth by countless worried fingers. "My grandfather made this," she said quietly, following his gaze. "Before the wars, before everything changed. He was carpenter in our village, very skilled, made beautiful things." She traced one of the carved flourishes with her thumb. "This is all I have left of home. Must mean a lot to you." "It is reminder," she said simply, "of who I was before Victor, before I learned to be afraid of my own shadow." Jack wanted to ask what she'd been like then, before fear became her constant companion. Instead, he found himself sharing something he'd never told anyone. "After my father died, I used to come out here every night for months. Couldn't sleep, couldn't seem to settle anywhere in the house. Everything reminded me that he was gone, that I was supposed to fill his boots somehow." Anya turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the stars beginning to appear overhead. "Were you afraid?" "Terrified. Not of the work. I'd been helping, run this ranch since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, but afraid I wasn't the man he'd been, afraid I'd fail Ma, fail the ranch, fail everyone who depended on me. But you did not fail. Not yet, anyway." Jack smiled ruefully, "Though some days I still feel like I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing." The admission seemed to surprise her. "You always seem so certain, so strong." "Strength isn't about never being afraid," Jack said, thinking of his father's words. "It's about doing what needs doing even when you are afraid." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle settling for the evening, horses moving restlessly in the corral, the distant call of a coyote from the hills. It was a peaceful scene, but Jack could feel tension radiating from the woman beside him. "Anya," he said finally, "can I ask you something?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "What happened the night Victor was supposed to have died?" For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He came home drunk, angrier than usual. Had lost money gambling, and he blamed me for his bad luck, said I was curse upon his life." She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "He beat me worse than ever before. I was certain he would kill me that night." Jack's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "What did you do?" "There was bottle of medicine for his heart troubles. Doctor had prescribed it months before, but Victor rarely took it. Said medicine was for weak men." Her fingers worked nervously at the wooden cross. "I put some in his whiskey, not to kill him, just to make him sleep. So pain would stop, but he didn't die. He collapsed. Stopped breathing for a while. I thought the doctor came, said his heart had stopped, that the drinking had finally killed him." She looked up at Jack, tears glittering in her eyes. "I was so relieved, so grateful to God for ending my torment. I felt terrible for being glad, but I could not help it. Anyone would have felt the same. When the doctor left, I gathered what little I could carry and ran, took only my clothes, my grandfather's cross, and—" She hesitated. "And what?" "Money. Victor kept cash hidden in the house. Money he had stolen from others, I think. I took enough for passage west. I told myself it was payment for years of suffering, but taking it made me thief." Jack understood now why she'd been so careful about her honesty when they first met. In her mind, she was a criminal who'd tried to murder her husband and stolen his money when she thought she'd succeeded. "Sounds to me like you took what you were owed," he said firmly. "A woman's got a right to wages for keeping a man's house, even if he's too much of a bastard to pay them." She stared at him in surprise. "You do not think I am terrible person, wicked woman who tried to kill her husband? I think you're a woman who did what she had to do to survive. Nothing more, nothing less." The relief that crossed her face was almost painful to witness. Sheriff Coleman, he will not see it that way. Sheriff Coleman's got his own problems to worry about. Main one being that he's taking bribes from a man who beats women. You think Victor is paying him. I think Victor's got more money than any immigrant farmer should have, and he's spreading it around to people who might be useful. Question is, how much did he steal, and who did he steal it from? It was a thought that had been nagging at Jack since Victor's first appearance. The man's clothes, his confident manner, the ease with which he'd apparently bought cooperation from local law enforcement. None of it fit with Anya's description of a poor immigrant farmer. "There is something else," Anya said hesitantly. "Something. I should tell you." Jack waited, sensing this was important. "Before I left, I heard Victor talking to men in our house. Rough men, dangerous men. They spoke of things, illegal things, stolen cattle, robbed banks. I think Victor was not just farmer. I think he was part of gang. That explained a lot. If Victor was connected to criminal activity, it would account for his money and his connections. It also made him more dangerous than Jack had initially realized. Why didn't you tell the sheriff this? Who would believe word of runaway wife? Against respected businessmen? Victor, he is very good at appearing respectable when it suits him. Jack nodded grimly. He'd known men like that. Wolves who wore sheep's clothing when convenient, but showed their true nature when they thought no one important was watching. Anya, I need you to understand something. What's coming won't be easy. Victor's not going to give up, and he's got resources we can't match. If you want to leave, find somewhere else to start over. I'll help you. Give you money, safe passage, whatever you need. She was quiet for so long, he thought she might actually be considering it. Then she stood, folding his mother's shawl carefully. In her arms. "No," she said simply. "I am tired of running, tired of being afraid. If Victor wants me back, he will have to fight for me. And if he fights..." She looked down at the wooden cross in her palm, then closed her fingers around it. "Then I will fight too." As she walked back toward the house, Jack felt something shift in the air around them. The frightened woman who'd arrived at their ranch was still there, but something else was emerging, something stronger, more determined. For the first time since Victor's reappearance, Jack allowed himself to hope they might actually have a chance. Behind him, storm clouds continued gathering on the horizon, but inside the house, lamplight glowed warm and steady against the darkness. Some storms, Jack reflected, were worth weathering if you had the right people standing with you when the wind began to blow. October arrived with a bite in the air that spoke of winter's approach. The aspens on the distant hillsides had turned to gold, and the cattle moved with the restless energy of animals sensing seasonal change. It was the time of year when ranch work intensified, final preparations for the harsh months ahead that could mean the difference between prosperity and disaster. Anya threw herself into these preparations with an intensity that surprised both Jack and Maggie. She seemed determined to prove her worth, to demonstrate that she belonged not just as hired help, but as a true member of their household. She spent long days in the kitchen, preserving vegetables from the garden and preparing the hearty meals that would sustain them through winter's isolation. It was during these busy weeks that Jack began to see glimpses of who Anya had been before. Victor's cruelty dimmed her spirit. When she thought no one was watching, she would hum while she worked, old melodies from her homeland that carried both sorrow and hope in their minor keys. Her movements in the kitchen took on an almost musical quality, efficient but graceful, the work of someone who found genuine satisfaction in creating order from chaos. "She's got her grandmother's hands," Maggie observed one morning watching. "And you knead bread with the kind of rhythm that spoke of years of practice. Can tell by the way she works dough, learned from someone who knew the old ways." Jack nodded, though his attention was caught by something else. The way Anya's face softened when she worked with food, the quiet pride she took in setting a proper table, the care she showed in preparing meals that nourished both body and spirit. It was becoming clear that she found purpose in these domestic arts, not as subservience, but as a form of creative expression. That afternoon, he found her in the pantry, organizing preserved goods with the methodical attention of a quartermaster. Preparing for siege, Glass jars of vegetables lined the shelves in neat rows, each labeled in her careful handwriting. Sacks of flour, sugar, and salt were arranged with military precision. Hanging from the rafters were bundles of dried herbs that filled the small space with the scents of summer. "Ma's been trying to get that pantry properly organized for years," Jack said from the doorway. "You've accomplished more in a month than she managed in a decade." Anya looked up from the ledger where she was recording their supplies, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "In my family, my babushka, grandmother, she taught us that winter survival depends on summer preparation. Plan like you will live forever. Prepare like you will die tomorrow." She showed him the ledger, pages filled with neat columns tracking their food stores, rationing calculations, and notes about which items should be used first. It was the work of someone who understood scarcity, who had learned to make every resource count. "This is impressive," Jack said, genuinely amazed by the thoroughness of her planning. "You've thought of things I never would have considered." In the old country, we had saying, "Winter does not ask if you are ready." I do not want your family to suffer because I did not do my part. The word family hung in the air between them. Jack realized she'd included herself in that designation, claimed a place among them that went beyond mere employment. The thought warmed him more than he cared to admit. Later that evening, as they gathered around the kitchen table for supper, Maggie presented Anya with a slim, leather-bound book that Jack recognized as his grandmother's recipe collection. The older woman's hands shook slightly as she placed it before Anya's plate. "This belonged to my mother, and her mother before that," Maggie said. "Recipes brought from Ireland, adapted for frontier life, improved over generations. I've been meaning to copy them down properly, but my handwriting's not what it used to be." Anya opened the book carefully, her eyes widening as she took in pages of faded ink and careful notations. Some recipes were written in English, others in what looked like Gaelic, with margin notes added by different hands over the years. "Mrs. Callahan, this is family treasure. I cannot, you can and you will," Maggie said firmly. "Those recipes need someone who understands their value, someone who will use them and add to them. I've watched you cook, child. You've got the gift. But I am not family. I am just—" "You're just what we need," Jack interrupted quietly. "And if you're willing, we'd like you to think of this as your home, not just your workplace." The conversation that followed was halting, emotional, filled with the kind of careful honesty that comes when people are trying to define relationships that don't fit conventional categories. Anya was not a servant, but neither was she exactly a daughter or sister. She was something new. A woman who had chosen them as much as they had chosen her, creating bonds based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than blood or legal obligation. "In my country," Anya said finally, "we have word, Rodina. It means family but also homeland, the place where you belong. I thought I had lost my Rodina forever when I came to America. But perhaps Rodina is not just place you are, born, but place you choose to make your life." That night, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the ranch that had been his whole world for most of his life. The familiar landscape looked different somehow, not because anything had changed physically, but because his understanding of what constituted home had expanded to include not just the land and buildings, but the people who gave them meaning. He thought about Anya downstairs in her room, probably awake herself, carefully copying recipes into a new ledger that would eventually become her own contribution to the family collection. The image of her bent over the pages, preserving old knowledge while adding her own insights, struck him as profoundly meaningful. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the ranch boundaries, Victor Petrov was planning his next move. Jack had no doubt the man would return, probably with more resources and greater determination. The legal system might even support his claims. After all, marriage was considered a binding contract, and wives were often viewed as little more than property in the eyes of the law. But Jack was beginning to understand that some bonds transcended legal documents. What was growing between Anya and his family, and if he was honest, between Anya and himself, was based on choice rather than obligation, on mutual care rather than ownership. It was the kind of connection that Victor, for all his money and influence, could never truly understand or destroy. The next morning brought the first hard frost of the season. Jack found Anya in the garden before dawn, covering the last of the tender plants with burlap sacks and old blankets. Her breath created small clouds in the cold air, and her hands were red with cold despite the gloves she wore. Could have waited. "Until the sun came up," he said, joining her among the rows of vegetables. "Frost waits for no one," she replied, but she was smiling as she said it. "Besides, I wanted to save the last of the herbs. Your mother mentioned she likes sage tea for her morning stiffness." They worked together in the pre-dawn quiet, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor. Jack found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the quiet competence she brought to every task, the small sounds she made as she worked. When they finished protecting the garden, they stood together in the growing light, surveying their handiwork. The covered plants looked like small ghosts scattered across the dark earth, but Jack knew that beneath the protective layers, life continued, dormant perhaps, but waiting for the right conditions to flourish again. "It's beautiful," Anya said, softly, and Jack realized she wasn't just talking about the garden. She was looking at the whole vista, the ranch buildings silhouetted against the dawn sky, the distant mountains painted pink by the rising sun, the vast expanse of territory that rolled away toward horizons that seemed to promise infinite possibility. "Yes," Jack agreed, though he found himself looking at her rather than the landscape. "It is." As they walked back toward the house where coffee would be brewing and the day's work awaiting, Jack felt something settle into place inside his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced since before his father's death, the sense that his life was complete, that he had everything he needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He didn't know it yet, but before the month was over, that feeling would be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. The peace they'd built together was about to be shattered, and the bonds they'd forged would need to prove their strength against forces that threatened to tear their makeshift family apart. For now, though, there was morning coffee and the promise of another day working side by side, building something beautiful from the simple materials of daily life. November brought the first snow, light dustings that transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale before melting away in the afternoon sun. With the heavy work of harvest complete, the rhythm of daily life settled into the slower, more contemplative pace of approaching winter. It was during these quieter weeks that the subtle dance between Jack and Anya began to shift into something deeper and more complex. It started with small things, moments of awareness that crept up on them when they were focused on practical tasks. The brush of fingers when she handed him his coffee cup in the morning, the way his presence seemed to calm her when she woke from nightmares that still haunted her sleep. The comfortable silences that stretched between them as they worked side by side, needing no words to coordinate their efforts. Jack noticed how she'd begun to anticipate his needs with an intuition that went beyond mere efficiency. She would have tools ready before he asked for them, would prepare exactly the meal he was craving without being told, would sense his moods with an accuracy that sometimes startled him. It wasn't the nervous attention of a servant trying to avoid displeasure, but the thoughtful care of someone who genuinely wanted to make his life easier. For her part, Anya seemed to find peace in these quiet domestic rhythms. The brittle tension that had marked her first weeks at the ranch had given way to something softer, more natural. She hummed while she worked, laughed at Maggie's stories, and occasionally caught Jack's eye with small smiles that suggested she was beginning to believe in the possibility of happiness. The transformation was most evident in the evenings when the day's work was done and they gathered around the kitchen table for supper. What had once been awkward meals, eaten in careful politeness, had evolved into genuine family time, with conversation flowing easily between stories of the day's events, plans for future projects, and gentle teasing that spoke of growing intimacy. It was during one such evening that Jack found himself really looking at Anya, not as his employee or even as a woman in need of protection, but as herself. The lamplight caught the gold highlights in her dark hair, and when she smiled at something, Maggie said, her entire face transformed with warmth and humor. She was, he realized with a start, genuinely beautiful, not in the obvious way that turned men's heads on the street, but in the deeper way that came from inner strength and kindness made visible. The realization should have been simple, even welcome. Instead, it filled Jack with a complex mixture of longing and guilt that kept him awake long into the night. What right did he have to think of her in romantic terms when she was still healing from years of abuse? How could he be sure his feelings weren't taking advantage of her vulnerability, her dependence on his protection? These questions might have remained purely theoretical if not for a pair of worn leather gloves. Jack discovered them on the kitchen and table one morning, clearly meant for his use, but obviously altered. Someone had carefully adjusted the sizing, reinforced the palms with extra leather, and even added fleece lining to ward off the winter cold. The craftsmanship was meticulous, the work of someone who understood both leatherworking and the specific demands of ranch work. "Where did these come from?" he asked, holding them up as Anya entered the kitchen. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I found them in barn. Old gloves, but good leather. I thought, your hands, they get so cold during morning chores. I hoped, perhaps you made these for me?" The blush deepened. "Is not proper gift, just practical thing. I did not want you to think I was presuming." "Anya," Jack's voice was soft, stopping her nervous explanation. "Thank you. This is no one's ever made me anything like this before." He slipped the gloves on, marveling at how perfectly they fit. She must have studied his hands carefully to achieve such precision, must have spent hours working leather by lamplight after her other duties were finished. The thought of her taking such care, investing such personal attention in his comfort, created a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fleece lining. "They fit well?" she asked anxiously. "They're perfect." He flexed his fingers, feeling the suppleness of the leather, the thoughtful placement of reinforcement patches. "How did you learn to work leather like this?" "My father, he was cobbler in our village. Before everything changed, he taught me to work with leather and thread. Said it was useful skill for women to have." Her voice grew wistful. "I had almost forgotten how much I enjoyed it." That afternoon, as Jack worked in the bitter cold of the approaching storm, the gloves proved their worth. His hands stayed warm and flexible, protected but not clumsy. Every time he looked down at them, he thought of Anya bent over her work, stitching with patient care, thinking of his comfort during the long hours of solitary labor. When he returned to the house at dusk, stamping snow from his boots and grateful for warmth, he found Anya and Maggie in the kitchen, their heads bent together over what appeared to be serious conversation. They looked up as he entered, and he caught something conspiratorial in their expressions. "Everything all right?" he asked, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. Fine, Maggie said with the kind of casual tone that suggested the opposite. "Just discussing household matters." But later that evening, after Maggie had retired to her room with one of her novels, Jack found himself alone with Anya in the kitchen. She was mending one of his shirts by lamplight, her needle moving with the same careful precision she brought. "And to all her tasks, Ma seems to think you and I should talk," she said, without looking up from her sewing. Jack settled into the chair across from her, noting the way the light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "About what?" "About what happens next, about—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "About whether what I think I see in your eyes is real, or just kindness toward broken woman." The directness of her words caught him off guard. He'd been trying to be subtle to avoid pressuring her with his growing feelings. Apparently, he'd been less successful at hiding them than he'd hoped. "What do you think you see?" he asked carefully. She set down her needle and looked at him directly, her dark eyes serious. "I think you look at me sometimes like man looks at woman he cares for, not like employer looks at servant, not like protector looks at victim, like," she struggled for words, "like you see me as I was before Victor broke me, like you see me as I might be again." Jack felt his heart racing. "And what do you see when you look at me?" "I see man who has never raised hand to woman. Man who works hard, loves his family, keeps his word." Her voice grew softer. "I see man who makes me remember what it feels like to be safe, to be valued." The silence that followed was charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Jack wanted to reach across the table, to take her hands in his, to tell her exactly how he felt. But he also knew the weight of what she'd endured, the careful healing that had brought her this far. "Anya," he said finally, "I need you to know that whatever happens between us, you always have a place here. Not because of any feelings, but because you're family now. That doesn't change, regardless." She nodded, understanding the reassurance he was offering. "And I need you to know that if there were to be something more between us, it would not be from gratitude or desperation. It would be because you are a good man who deserves to be loved properly." The word loved hung in the air between them, powerful and fragile as spun glass. Jack felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he'd kept carefully locked since his father's death. The possibility of love, of partnership, of building something beautiful with someone who understood both joy and sorrow. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," he said gently. "We have time." "Yes," she agreed, but her eyes held a warmth that suggested decisions were already being made, feelings already acknowledged, even if not yet acted upon. "We have time." Outside, snow was beginning to fall in earnest, the first real storm of the season, but inside the warm kitchen, with lamplight casting golden circles around them and years of loneliness beginning to ease into something like hope, the approaching winter felt less like an ending and more like a peaceful interlude before a new chapter could begin. Neither of them knew that their time for gentle courtship was about to be cut short, that forces beyond their control were already moving to destroy the fragile happiness they'd built together. For now, though, there was contentment in simply being together, in the quiet understanding that something precious was growing between them, something worth protecting against whatever storms lay ahead. The wanted poster arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, delivered by a grim-faced deputy who barely stayed long enough to collect Jack's signature confirming receipt. The paper was official federal material, bearing the seal of the U.S. Marshal's office and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of one Victor Petrov, also known as Victor Kowalski, also known as the Pale Wolf. Jack stared at the document, his blood growing cold as he read the list of charges: murder in the first degree, armed robbery, cattle rustling, conspiracy to commit federal crimes, and association with the notorious Kowalski gang. The sketch beneath the text was unmistakably Victor, though it showed him clean-shaven and wearing a gentleman's suit rather than the rough clothes he'd worn during his visit to the ranch. But it was the final paragraph that made Jack's hands shake as he held the paper. Victor Petrov was wanted in connection with the murder of Sheriff Thomas Mitchell of Laramie County and Deputy James Cooper, killed during a bank robbery 3 months prior, the same time frame when Anya thought she'd poisoned her husband to death. "What is it, son?" Maggie asked, noting his expression as he stood frozen in the doorway. Before Jack could answer, Anya appeared in the kitchen, carrying a basket of eggs from the morning collection. She took one look at the paper in his hands and went pale as winter snow. "No," she whispered, the basket falling from nerveless fingers to shatter against the floor. "No, it cannot be." Jack moved quickly to steady her as she swayed, guiding her to a chair while Maggie hurried to clean up the broken eggs. "Anya, when exactly did Victor supposedly die?" "August 20th, she said numbly. "Doctor came in evening, said his heart had failed." "I remember date because it was my saint's day, Saint Helena. I thought it was sign from God." Jack consulted the dates on the wanted poster, his worst fears confirmed. The Laramie bank robbery happened August 22nd, 2 days after Victor was supposed to be dead. The implications crashed over them like an avalanche. Victor hadn't just survived Anya's desperate attempt to drug him. He'd used his apparent death as cover to commit increasingly brazen crimes. While she'd fled west in terror and guilt, believing herself a murderer, he'd been building a reputation as one of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. "But how?" Anya asked, her voice barely audible. "The doctor said, I saw him myself, not breathing." "Some men know tricks," Maggie said grimly, "especially men with criminal experience, ways to slow the heart, appear dead for short periods. Learned it from Indian medicine men, most likely." Jack studied the poster more carefully, noting details he'd missed in his initial shock. The reward amount was staggering, $5,000 for Victor alone, with lesser amounts for his known associates. This wasn't just local law enforcement seeking a common criminal. This was a federal manhunt for a man considered extremely dangerous. "Listen to me," Jack said, kneeling beside Anya's chair. "This changes everything. You're not a fugitive from justice. You're a witness to federal crimes. Victor's not some abusive husband with legal rights. He's a wanted murderer." But instead of relief, Anya's face showed only growing terror. "You don't understand. If he is truly Pale Wolf, if he leads the Kowalski gang—" She looked up at Jack with haunted eyes. "He will never stop hunting me, never. I know too much about his operations, about places he hid money, about men he worked with. As long as I live, I am threat to him." The kitchen fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind picking up outside. Jack felt the weight of realization settling over him like a physical burden. This wasn't just about a man trying to reclaim his runaway wife. This was about a dangerous criminal eliminating a witness who could destroy him. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly. Anya's hands trembled as she pressed them to her face. "More than I understood at the time. Victor. He was careful around me, but not careful enough. I heard names, saw faces of men who came to our house. I know about Cave, where they stored stolen goods, about Banker in Denver who bought cattle without asking questions about brands. Did you tell any of this to Sheriff Coleman?" "I tried, but he would not listen. Said I was hysterical woman making wild accusations to avoid facing my own crimes." Her voice grew bitter. "Now I understand why. If Victor has been paying him..." Jack stood abruptly, pacing to the window to stare out at the ranch yard. Everything made sense now. Coleman's quick arrival after Victor's visit, his certainty about Anya's supposed crimes, his dismissal of her claims about abuse. The sheriff wasn't just corrupt. He was actively working with a federal fugitive. "We need to get word to the federal marshals," he said. "Tell them what Anya knows. Get her into protective custody." "No!" The force of Anya's response surprised them both. "You don't understand how these men work. Federal marshals, they are good men, but they are not gods. They cannot be everywhere, cannot protect everyone. And Victor," she shuddered, "Victor is like Wolf, patient, cunning. He will wait until I am vulnerable, then strike." Maggie moved to stand behind Anya's chair, placing protective hands on the younger woman's shoulders. "What are you saying, child?" "I am saying that running will not work. Hiding will not work. Victor will never stop hunting me because he cannot afford to let me live. The only way this ends..." She looked up at Jack with desperate resolve. "The only way this ends is if he dies first." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything civilized and lawful. Jack understood what she was suggesting, that they abandon hope of legal resolution and prepare for a war that could only end with blood. There has to be another way. he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Tell me what it is," Anya replied. "Tell me how to escape man who has federal law enforcement in his pocket, who has network of killers at his command, who knows this territory better than any marshal sent from back east." Jack couldn't answer, because there was no good answer. The federal marshals might eventually catch Victor, but not before he'd had opportunity to eliminate the witness who posed the greatest threat to his freedom. And if Sheriff Coleman was truly in Victor's employ, then local law enforcement was worse than useless. It was actively hostile. "How long do we have?" Maggie asked practically. Anya considered the question seriously. "Not long. Victor is proud. Man. And Jack's defiance wounded that pride. But he is also a careful man who plans his moves. He will wait until conditions favor him. Bad weather to prevent escape. Time when federal attention is focused elsewhere." She looked toward the window, where snow was beginning to fall more heavily. "Perhaps until deep winter, when we are isolated and help is far away." "That gives us time to prepare," Jack said grimly. "Prepare for what? You are rancher, not gunfighter, and I am just woman who knows how to cook and clean." Anya's voice carried the hopelessness of someone who'd spent years feeling powerless. "What can we do against professional killers?" It was Maggie who answered, her voice carrying the steel that had helped her survive frontier life for 7 decades. "We can be smarter than they are. We can use what we know about this land, about winter survival, about each other. Most importantly, we can refuse to let them make us victims." She moved to the old cabinet beside the fireplace, retrieving a wooden box that Jack hadn't seen opened in years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was his father's service revolver from his time in the territorial militia. Beside it lay a smaller weapon, a derringer that had belonged to Maggie's mother. "Your grandfather used to say that frontier justice wasn't about who was fastest with a gun," Maggie said, checking the mechanisms with practiced efficiency. "It was about who was most determined to protect what mattered. Victor may be professional, killer, but he's never faced people fighting for their home and family." As if summoned by the mention of determination, a memory surfaced in Jack's mind, something his father had told him years ago about asymmetric warfare, about how smaller forces could defeat larger ones through superior knowledge of terrain and unbreakable will to survive. "We're not going to face them head on," he said slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. "We're going to make them come to us, on our terms, in conditions that favor defense over attack." Anya looked between Jack and Maggie, seeing something in their faces that she'd never encountered before. The stubborn refusal to surrender that had built civilization in hostile wilderness. The quiet determination that turned ordinary people into legends when circumstances demanded it. "You would do this for me?" she asked wonderingly. "Risk everything to protect someone who has brought nothing but trouble?" "You haven't brought trouble," Jack replied firmly. "You've brought family, and we protect our family no matter the cost." Outside, the snow continued falling, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, or perhaps it was just the wind. But inside the warm kitchen, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds began planning for a war that none of them wanted, but all of them understood was inevitable. The peaceful interlude was over. Now came the reckoning. The first blizzard of the season arrived 3 days after the wanted poster, bringing with it the kind of bone-deep cold that made even seasoned ranchers question their choice to live in Wyoming Territory. But for Jack, the storm was a blessing. In disguise, it would buy them time to prepare while making travel nearly impossible for anyone foolish enough to venture onto the plains in such weather. For 5 days, the wind howled like a living thing around the ranch buildings, piling snow against the walls and turning the familiar landscape into an alien wilderness of white. During those enforced days of indoor confinement, the 3 of them worked with quiet urgency to transform their home into something that could withstand siege. Jack started with the obvious preparations, checking weapons, counting ammunition, reinforcing doors and windows. His father's old cavalry training proved valuable as he planned fields of fire and identified defensive positions. But it was Anya who suggested the preparations that might actually save their lives. "In my country," she said, studying the ranch house layout with tactical eyes that surprised Jack. "When Cossacks came to village, smart families prepared for long siege. Not just weapons, but food, water, medicine, ways to survive when enemy controls everything outside your walls." Under her guidance, they moved essential supplies to the most defensible part of the house, the original cabin that formed the building's core with its thick log walls and limited points of entry. They stockpiled water in every available container, moved medical supplies and preserved food within easy reach, and even arranged alternative heating methods in case the main fireplace became unusable. Most importantly, they planned escape routes. The root cellar had a tunnel that emerged near the barn, originally dug as winter access to stored vegetables, but now potentially life-saving if they needed to flee unseen. Jack reinforced the tunnel supports and stocked it with emergency supplies, blankets, food and weapons that could sustain them if they had to abandon the house. "You think like soldier," Maggie observed, watching Anya direct these preparations with calm efficiency. "Where did you learn such things?" "My village." It was on frontier, between Russian and Austrian territories. Sometimes we were part of one empire, sometimes the other, depending on which army had passed through most recently. Anya's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing ordinary childhood experiences. "You learn to prepare for trouble when trouble comes regularly." As the storm finally began to clear, Jack found himself studying this woman who'd become so central to his life, seeing yet another layer of strength beneath her gentle exterior. She wasn't just a victim who'd escaped abuse. She was a survivor who'd learned harsh lessons about human nature and wasn't naive about the violence that might be required to protect what mattered. On the 6th morning, when the wind finally died, and pale sunlight revealed a world transformed by snow, Jack made a discovery that confirmed their worst fears. Checking the livestock in the aftermath of the storm, he found tracks in the fresh snow, boot prints that circled the ranch buildings at a careful distance, too methodical to be casual travelers, too purposeful to be innocent. Someone had been watching them during the blizzard, studying their preparations, counting their defenses. "How many?" Anya asked when he reported the discovery. "At least 3, maybe 4. They stayed well back, used the storm for cover." Jack felt anger building in his chest at the violation of their sanctuary. Professional work. They know what they're doing. That evening, as they gathered for what might be their last peaceful meal for some time, Jack found himself memorizing details. The way lamplight caught the gold in Anya's hair, the comfortable sound of Maggie's voice as she read aloud from her latest novel, the simple contentment of being together in their warm kitchen while wind rattled the windows. "I need to say something," he announced, setting down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. Both women looked at him expectantly, sensing the gravity in his tone. "If things go badly tomorrow, or next week, or whenever they come, I need you both to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the work getting done or the ranch running smoothly, but because," he struggled for words adequate to the moment, "because we became a family, real family, chosen rather than inherited." Maggie reached across the table to pat his hand with her weathered fingers. "We know, son, we feel it too," but it was Anya's response that nearly undid him. She stood from her chair and moved to where he sat, then did something she'd never done before. She placed her hands on his shoulders and looked directly into his eyes. "Jack Callahan," she said formally, "you saved my life in ways you do not even understand. You gave me back my name, my dignity, my hope for future. If we die defending this place, we die as free people who chose our fate. That is gift beyond price." Then, with the kind of courage that comes from accepting the possibility of loss, she leaned down and kissed him, not with passion, but with The deep tenderness of someone saying goodbye to everything precious in the world. When she pulled back, Jack saw tears in her dark eyes, but also something else. Absolute determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "There's something else," Anya said. Reaching into her apron pocket, she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth, the torn piece of wedding dress that Jack had glimpsed weeks ago. "I want to burn this. Tonight. I want to watch it turn to ash and blow away on the wind." They built up the fire in the main fireplace until it roared like a forge. One by one, Anya fed pieces of the damaged fabric to the flames, watching years of pain and humiliation transform into smoke and light. The delicate lace caught quickly, curling and blackening before disappearing entirely. "I am no longer Victor's wife," she said, as the last fragment dissolved into embers. "I am no longer victim of his cruelty. I am Anya Petrov, and I choose to stand with people who love me." Jack felt something profound shift in the air around them, as if Anya's declaration had changed the fundamental nature of their situation. They were no longer just defending against an abusive husband's pursuit of his legal property. They were protecting a woman who'd claimed her freedom against a criminal who would destroy anyone standing in his way. The next morning brought crystalline cold and a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Jack was checking the cattle when he saw them. 4 riders approaching from the south, moving with the careful precision of men who knew exactly where they were going and what they intended to do when they arrived. Victor rode in the lead, dressed, now in the expensive clothes of a successful businessman, rather than the rough garb he'd worn during his first visit. The 3 men with him had the hard look of professional gunfighters, their weapons worn with the casual confidence of men who killed for money. Jack felt his father's service revolver heavy against his hip as he made his way back toward the house. This was it, the moment all their preparation had been leading toward. Whatever happened next would determine not just their survival, but the kind of people they chose to be when faced with ultimate testing. Inside the house, Anya was waiting. By the window, watching the approaching riders with eyes that held no fear, only grim resolve. Maggie sat in her chair by the fireplace, the old derringer resting in her lap like a deadly pet. "How do you want to play this?" Jack asked. "Carefully," Anya replied. "Victor will try to appear reasonable at first, use law and social convention. Against us. He's very good at making his victims look like the unreasonable ones." "Not this time," Jack said grimly. "This time he's dealing with people who know exactly what he is." As the riders drew closer, Jack could see Victor's pale eyes fixed on the house with predatory intensity. Whatever games he'd played before, whatever pretense of legal authority he'd hidden behind, the wanted poster had stripped away those disguises. Now it was simply a matter of who was willing to go further, risk more, fight harder for what they believed was right. The war they'd been preparing for was about to begin, and there would be no quarter asked or given on either side. In the crystal clear morning air, with snow sparkling like diamonds and death riding toward them across the frozen plains, Jack Callahan prepared to fight for everything that mattered in the world. Victor reined in his horse 50 yards from the house, close enough to be heard clearly, but far enough to avoid immediate gunfire. His 3 companions spread out in a loose semicircle, their positioning revealing military training and careful planning. These weren't random outlaws hired for quick violence. They were professionals who understood tactics and patience. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," Victor called, his voice carrying the same false civility he'd used during his first visit. "Beautiful day for a conversation, don't you think?" Jack stepped onto the porch, his hand resting casually near his weapon. "Conversation's fine, but I notice you brought more friends than necessary for talking." Victor's laugh was cold as the morning air. "Prudent precautions. This territory can be dangerous for travelers, especially with so many desperate criminals about." His pale eyes fixed on the house with predatory intensity. "Speaking of which, I believe you're harboring a fugitive from justice." "The only fugitive I see is the one sitting on that horse," Jack replied. "Pale Wolf, isn't it? That's what they call you on the wanted posters." For just a moment, Victor's mask of civility slipped, revealing the deadly nature beneath. Then he smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. Wanted posters can be inaccurate, created by vengeful men who resent successful immigrants. But my wife's crimes are well documented. "Your wife is dead," Jack said firmly. "You killed her the day you first raised your hand to her. The woman in this house is Anya Petrov, and she's under my protection." "Protection?" Victor's voice dripped contempt. "From what? From her lawful husband who loves her despite her many faults? From the justice she richly deserves for attempted murder and theft?" The accusation was calculated to make Jack doubt, to plant seeds of uncertainty about Anya's character. But Jack had seen too much, learned too much about both of them to be swayed by words. "The only thief here is you," he replied. "The only murderer is you, and if you think you're taking her back to whatever hell you crawled out of, you're mistaken." Victor's expression hardened. "Mr. Callahan, you seem to be under several misapprehensions. Allow me to clarify your situation." He gestured toward his companions. "These gentlemen represent various interests that have been inconvenienced by my wife's reckless behavior. They're here to ensure she faces appropriate consequences for her actions." "What they represent," Jack said, his voice carrying deadly calm, "is everything wrong with men who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. You made that mistake once already. Don't make it again." From one of the gunmen came a derisive snort. "Big talk from a dirt farmer playing at being a hero. This is business, rancher. Hand over the woman and we'll be on our way." Jack's attention shifted to the speaker, a lean man with the kind of hard features that spoke of violence as profession rather than passion. "Business," Jack repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you call murdering lawmen? What you call terrorizing women? Because from where I stand, it looks more like cowardice." The insult hit home. The gunman's hand twitched toward his weapon before. Victor's sharp gesture stopped him. "Patience, Collins. Mr. Callahan is about to learn an important lesson about the consequences of interfering in other men's affairs." Victor dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to be reasonable, Mr. Callahan. My wife has information that belongs to me, details about business ventures that could prove embarrassing if shared with the wrong people. I'm prepared to compensate you generously for your trouble in caring for her, and I give you my word that her punishment will be measured and appropriate." "Your word," Jack said, letting contempt color his voice. "The word of the Pale Wolf, the word of a man who beats women and murders lawmen." Forgive me if I don't find that particularly reassuring. Inside the house, Jack knew Anya was listening to every word, hearing Victor's casual discussion of her punishment, his reduction of her personhood to mere property and inconvenience. He hoped she could also hear the absolute refusal in his own voice, the unshakable determination to protect what they'd built together. "Very well," Victor said, his tone shifting to something colder and more dangerous. "Since you insist on being difficult, let me explain your alternatives more clearly." He nodded toward the barn, where Jack suddenly noticed smoke beginning to curl from beneath the doors. Horror flooded through Jack as he realized what they'd done. While Victor maintained his civilized facade, his men had used the distraction to set fire to the building that housed not just equipment and supplies, but the winter feed that would keep his cattle alive through the harsh months ahead. "A small demonstration," Victor continued conversationally, "to help you understand the scope of your predicament. My associates are quite creative when it comes to persuasion. The barn is just the beginning, unless my wife emerges from that. House in the next 5 minutes will continue our education until you grasp the futility of resistance." Jack felt rage building in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly what Victor wanted. to provoke him into rash action that would give the outlaws excuse for overwhelming violence. And if she does come out, what then? Then you and your mother live to enjoy many more peaceful days on your ranch. My wife and I will depart to continue our lives elsewhere, and this unfortunate misunderstanding will be forgotten. The lie was so blatant, so obviously false, that Jack wondered if Victor actually expected him to believe it. Once Anya was in their hands, there would be no reason to leave witnesses alive. They'd all die, probably after being forced to watch Anya suffer for her defiance. Counteroffer, Jack said quietly. You and your men ride out now, and I don't put bullets through the lot of you. Victor's laugh was genuinely amused. 4 against. And Mr. Callahan, even if you're faster than you look, the mathematics are not in your favor. 4 against 3, came Maggie's voice from the doorway. Jack's mother had emerged onto the porch, moving slowly, but carrying her late husband's rifle with obvious familiarity. And we know this ground better than you do. An old woman and a coward, scoffed the gunman, called Collins. This gets more pathetic by the minute. Before anyone could respond, the kitchen window opened, and Anya's voice rang out across the yard, clear and strong despite the cold air. Victor, you want to speak with me? Then speak. But leave these good people out of our business. Victor's attention snapped toward the window, his expression transforming into something hungry and possessive. There she is, my beautiful, treacherous wife. His voice carried across the distance like a caress that promised violence. Come out, Anya. Come home where you belong. I am home, Anya replied, and Jack could hear the steel in her voice. This is my family now, my life now. You have no power over me here, don't I? Victor gestured toward the burning barn, where flames were now visible through gaps in the siding. Shall I demonstrate the extent of my power? Shall I show your new family what happens to those who harbor fugitives? The threat was clear and immediate. Unless Anya surrendered, Victor would systematically destroy everything Jack and Maggie had built, probably killing them in the process. It was the classic outlaw strategy: force victims to choose between their own safety and the safety of those they loved. But as Jack watched smoke billow from his burning barn, as he felt the weight of his father's gun against his hip, and saw the determination in his mother's weathered face, he realized something that Victor had failed to understand. Some people couldn't be broken by threats. Some bonds couldn't be severed by violence. Some stands were worth taking regardless of the odds. The peaceful resolution time was over. Now came the part where they discovered who they really were, when everything civilized fell away, and only raw will remained. The kitchen door opened with a creak that seemed to echo across the frozen yard. Anya stepped onto the porch, moving with the careful dignity of someone walking to her own execution. In her right hand, she carried something that caught the morning. Light, a long, slender blade that Jack recognized as a kitchen knife, though it looked different in her grip, more purposeful and dangerous. "Let them go, Victor," she said, her voice carrying across the distance with surprising strength. "Your quarrel is with me, not with innocent people who showed kindness to a stranger." Victor's expression shifted to something like satisfaction, mixed with hunger. "There's my sensible girl. I knew you'd see reason eventually." He gestured for her to approach. "Come here, Anya. Come home to your husband." Instead of moving toward him, Anya descended the porch steps slowly, positioning herself in the open ground between the house and the mounted outlaws. Jack realized with growing alarm that she was drawing their fire away from the building, making herself the primary target to protect him and Maggie. "I said let them go first," she repeated, and now Jack could see what she held in her left hand. Her grandfather's wooden cross, clutched so tightly her knuckles showed white against the dark. "Wood, you're hardly in a position to make demands," Victor replied, though something in his tone suggested he was taking her more seriously than before. "But I'm feeling generous today. Mr. Callahan and his mother may keep their lives, provided they understand the consequences of future interference." It was then that Jack understood Anya's plan, and the realization filled him with both admiration and terror. She wasn't surrendering. She was drawing Victor close enough for her to strike. The woman who'd spent years being beaten and terrorized was preparing to make her final stand, not with submission, but with violence. "Anya, no!" Jack called out, but she didn't look back. Victor dismounted again, this time approaching with the confident stride of a predator who sensed victory. His gun remained holstered, but his hand rested near it with casual readiness. Behind him, his 3 companions kept their weapons trained on the house, ready to cut down anyone who interfered. "You know," Victor said conversationally as he closed, "the distance. I've missed you terribly these past months, missed our conversations, our intimate moments together." His voice dropped to something that carried even in the cold air. "I've thought extensively about how to properly welcome you home." 20 feet separated them now. Victor's pale eyes were fixed on Anya's face, reading the fear there and mistaking it for the old submission he'd conditioned into her through years of brutality. He couldn't see what Jack could see, that beneath the fear was something harder and more dangerous than Victor had ever encountered. 15 feet. Victor's smile widened as he sensed what he thought was her inevitable surrender. "That's close enough for now," he said, stopping just outside her reach. "Drop the knife, Anya. You know you could never use it anyway. You're too weak, too frightened, too broken." But Anya didn't drop the blade. Instead, she straightened her spine and looked directly into her tormentor's eyes. "You're right about one thing, Victor. I was broken. You broke me so thoroughly I forgot I was ever whole." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But these people, they helped me remember something you tried to steal from me." "And what's that?" Victor asked, amused. "That I am my grandfather's granddaughter. That I come from people who survived Cossacks and Austrians and Russians and every other wolf that came to prey on the innocent." She raised the knife, and Victor's amusement began to fade as he saw something in her stance that spoke of deadly purpose. "And that sometimes sheep grow teeth." Victor's hand moved toward his gun, but he was a half-second too slow. Anya lunged forward with the fluid grace of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. The kitchen knife transformed into something lethal in her grip. The blade caught Victor in the shoulder, sending him staggering backward with a cry of pain and surprise. "Kill them!" Victor shouted, his voice cracking with rage and shock. "Kill them all!" The command unleashed chaos. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions as Victor's men opened fire on the house. Jack threw himself behind the porch railing, pulling Maggie down with him as bullets splintered wood around them. From the kitchen window came the sharp crack of answering fire. Anya had apparently prepared for this moment too. Victor, blood streaming from his wounded shoulder, drew his pistol and aimed it at Anya with murder in his pale eyes. But before he could fire, Jack's bullet took him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees in the blood-stained snow. The gunfight that followed was brief, but vicious. Collins, the gunman who'd mocked Jack earlier, charged toward the house only to be cut down by Maggie's surprisingly accurate rifle fire. The remaining 2 outlaws, realizing they were caught in crossfire from multiple directions, tried to retreat to their horses. One almost made it. The other fell when Anya's second shot from the kitchen window caught him in the back as he ran. The survivor wheeled his horse and fled south across the prairie, leaving his dead companions and wounded leader behind. In the sudden silence that followed, Jack could hear nothing but his own heartbeat and the crackle of flames from the burning barn. Smoke drifted across the yard, mixing the scents of burning wood with gunpowder and blood. Victor was still alive, though barely. He knelt in the trampled snow, clutching his chest wound and staring at Anya with something like incomprehension. You actually did it," he gasped. "You actually fought back." Anya walked toward him slowly, the bloody knife still in her hand. Her face was pale but composed, showing none of the terror that had marked their previous encounters. "Did you think I would run forever? Did you think there was no limit to what you could take from me?" "I made you," Victor snarled, though his voice was weakening. "Without me, you're nothing, just another immigrant woman with no prospects, no future." "You're wrong," Anya said quietly, kneeling beside him in the snow. You never made me. You only revealed what was already there. The strength my grandfather passed down, the courage my grandmother carried across an ocean. You broke my body, Victor, but you never touched my soul. Victor tried to speak again, but blood filled his mouth. His pale eyes, which had terrorized Anya for so many years, grew glassy and distant. With a final rattling breath, the pale wolf died in the Wyoming snow, far from the land of his birth and surrounded by the wreckage of his own cruelty. Anya remained kneeling beside the body for a long moment, her grandfather's cross pressed to her lips. When she finally stood, she looked toward the house where Jack and Maggie waited, and her face held something that hadn't been there before, the quiet peace of someone who'd finally laid her ghosts to rest. "Is it over?" Maggie called from the porch. "Yes," Anya replied, dropping the bloody knife into the snow. "It's over." As Jack moved to embrace her, to offer comfort and support after the violence they'd all endured, he saw something in her dark eyes that filled him with hope for their future. The fear was gone, replaced by the steady strength of someone who discovered she was capable of protecting what mattered most. Behind them, the barn continued burning, but it could be rebuilt. The cattle could be relocated, the damage repaired. What couldn't be rebuilt was trust, once broken, or peace, once shattered by violence. But sometimes, Jack reflected as he held Anya close, the only way to preserve what you love is to fight for it with everything you have. The war was over. Now came the harder task of building something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Spring came early that year, arriving with the kind of gentle warmth that made the harsh winter feel like a distant memory. By May, new grass had grown over the disturbed earth where Victor and his men had fallen, and wildflowers bloomed in abundance. Across the prairie, the barn had been rebuilt, larger and more efficient than before, with help from neighbors who understood that some fights were worth supporting even when they didn't directly concern you. Jack stood in the doorway of that new barn, watching Anya work in the kitchen garden that had become her particular domain. She moved among the plants with the unconscious grace he'd come to associate with her healing, her movements efficient but unhurried. The woman who'd arrived at their ranch nearly a year ago, frightened, broken, expecting violence at every turn, had been replaced by someone who carried herself with quiet confidence and genuine peace. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. For weeks after the confrontation, Anya had struggled with nightmares and sudden moments of fear when unexpected sounds or movements triggered memories of violence. But gradually, as the seasons turned and their quiet life resumed its rhythm, those shadows had faded. Now she slept peacefully through the night, laughed easily at Maggie's stories, and met Jack's eyes with warmth that held no reservation or fear. "You're wool gathering again," Maggie observed, appearing beside him with the walking stick she'd taken to carrying more for comfort than necessity. At 72, she remained sharp as a tack, though she'd begun talking about slowing down and letting the younger generation take more responsibility. "Just thinking," Jack replied, though his attention remained on Anya as she carefully tended a row of herbs that would season their meals through the coming winter. Thinking or planning. Maggie's tone carried the knowing humor of someone who'd been watching the careful courtship that had developed between Jack and Anya over the past months. "Maybe both," Jack admitted. "Ma, there's something I want to ask you. About time. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve entirely." Jack pulled a small object from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, carefully cleaned and polished until it gleamed in the morning light. "Do you think she'd accept it? Do you think she's ready for more?" Maggie studied the ring with the careful attention she'd once given to prize livestock. "That depends on what you're offering. Marriage for marriage's sake, because it's expected, or partnership built on real understanding of who she is and what she's been through." "The second," Jack said without hesitation. "She's not just someone to keep house and bear children. She's the other half of something I didn't know. Was incomplete. Then ask her, you fool. But ask her properly. Not because she needs protection or security, but because you can't imagine your life without her in it. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Jack found his moment. Anya was working on another recipe transcription, carefully copying one of Maggie's family formulas into the ledger that had become her own contribution to their household traditions. The lamplight caught the gold highlights in her dark hair, and her face held the peaceful concentration of someone engaged in meaningful work. "Anya," Jack said, setting aside his own evening reading, "I've been thinking about our future." She looked up from her writing, her dark eyes calm and attentive. "What about it? About what we want it to look like, what we want to build together?" Jack felt his heart racing but forced himself to speak steadily. "I know you've had reasons to be cautious about marriage, about trusting men with that kind of power over your life." "Yes," she said simply, though her expression showed no fear at the direction of the conversation. "I want you to know that what I'm offering isn't about ownership or control. It's about partnership. Two people choosing to face whatever comes together as equals." He pulled out the ring, holding it where she could see it clearly. "This was my grandmother's. She wore it for 53 years, through good times and hard ones. If you'll have it, I'd like you to wear it too." Anya set down her pen and reached out to touch the simple band with gentle fingers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But Jack, are you certain? I come with complications, with a past that might create future problems. There could be other members of Victor's gang, people seeking revenge or the money he stole. Then we'll face them together, just like we faced Victor." Jack took her hands in his, noting the calluses that spoke of honest work and the small scars that told stories of survival. "Anya, you're the strongest person I've ever known. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came through it with your kindness intact. I don't want to protect you because you're weak. I want to stand beside you because you're strong." Tears gathered in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "You see me as I am, not as what was done to me. I see who you've always been underneath. Brave, determined, capable of building something beautiful, even when everything around you was ugly." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "Will you marry me, Anya Petrov? Will you help me turn this ranch into the home we both deserve?" Her answer came not in words, but in the kiss she gave him, warm, willing, full of promise for the years ahead. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing through tears that spoke of relief and hope and love finally acknowledged. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you, Jack Callahan, and I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of the love you've shown me." "You already have," he replied, holding her close as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of Maggie's voice, raised in what sounded suspiciously like a victory celebration, though she'd deny eavesdropping if confronted. The sound made them both laugh again, recognizing the joy of someone who'd watched two damaged people heal each other through patient care and genuine affection. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church where they'd first met, with Pastor Williams officiating and half the territory in attendance. Anya wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric ordered specially from Denver, simple but elegant, the kind of garment that spoke of a woman who understood her own worth. Jack wore his father's best suit, carefully altered to fit, carrying forward family tradition while starting something entirely new. The celebration afterward lasted until dawn, with music and dancing that brought together immigrants and natives, ranchers and townspeople, all united in the joy of witnessing love triumph over hardship. But for Jack and Anya, the most meaningful moment came near midnight, when they stood together in their kitchen now officially and completely, and shared a quiet cup of tea from Maggie's precious Irish china. "No more running," Anya said, her voice soft with contentment. "No more loneliness," Jack replied, raising his cup in a toast to their future. Outside, Wyoming wind sang across the prairie, carrying the scents of sage and grass and the promise of seasons yet to come. Inside their warm home, three people who'd found each other against all odds settled into the comfortable rhythm of family life, secure in the knowledge that they'd built something strong enough to weather any storm. In the months and years that followed, there would be challenges, droughts and harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, the ordinary difficulties of ranch life. Anya would give birth to three children who grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable with their mother's Polish lullabies and their father's Wyoming pragmatism. Maggie would live to see her grandchildren born and would pass away, peacefully in her sleep at 81, leaving behind a legacy of strength and wisdom that shaped the family for generations. But on that spring evening when it all began, as Jack Callahan slipped his grandmother's ring onto the finger of a woman who'd traveled halfway around the world to find her true home, the future stretched ahead bright with possibility. They'd learned that love wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you chose every day, despite fear and uncertainty and the knowledge that the world could be cruel to those who dared to hope. Some stories end with rescue, others end with revenge. But the best stories, the ones worth remembering, end with the quiet triumph of two people who refused to let their past define their future, who chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. In the warm glow of lamplight, surrounded by the tools and treasures of their shared life, Jack and Anya Callahan began the long, sweet work of proving that sometimes, if you're patient enough and brave enough and willing to fight for what matters, love really can conquer all.